All right, again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for today's webinar. We will be getting started shortly, but I just wanted to introduce you to the webinar and to everybody that is going to be talking. So this is our second College Readiness and Management webinar. This one's going to be talking all about the navigating the college admissions process. So there's a ton of information we're going to be going over, talking about how the process is a little bit different for folks heading back to school as adults versus right out of high school, college expenses and financial aid, and then setting appropriate expectations. So I'm really excited to have you guys see all this information. Before we do get started, if you have any questions, again, there is a question box. Drop your questions, and at the end of the webinar, we'll be able to go through them and get through as many as possible. But that's about it. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Amy Dietzman, and she will get things started.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our College Readiness and Management series. Like Maxine just told you, this is the second one. A few weeks ago, we presented on the college decision, how to determine if college is right for you, what different fields of study require, and how to research a little further to find the right path for you. If you missed it, you can find it on our YouTube page, which we can share at the end of this presentation. After today's presentation on college admissions process, we will share the college experience, which is on September 28th. That one's going to be more about what you can expect as an adult learner, things like where to find resources you need while in college, how to schedule your time and balance all of your responsibilities, how to work with your classmates, things like that. And then for those of you who are ready to think about life after college, how to get a job in your new field, what employers are looking for, and more, you can join the final webinar in this series, which is on October 19th. So let's get started. Today, we would love to be able to help you plan for the application process, understand the typical college application, and discover financial options for college. Those are the main things we're going to hit today. As we go through this presentation, Henry, Rachel, and I are going to share our own educational backgrounds with you to let you know a little bit more about what our traditional or non-traditional experiences looked like, and maybe a little more about how we navigated those experiences. So a little about me. I had the very traditional college experience right out of high school. I moved out, lived in the dorm, did that whole thing. But later on, after getting married, having 2 kids, I discovered that my degree was not really what I wanted to do. So after researching and talking with an enrollment advisor, I determined that a master's in education was what I needed because I wanted to become a teacher. So I went back to school full time with 2 small children, got an online degree, and got a teaching job. But not long into my teaching tenure, I realized I really wanted to be a teacher leader. And that required more education. So I researched some more, decided that to reach the highest possible potential position, I should go ahead and get a doctorate degree. So I enrolled yet again in a mostly online program with some in-person week-long intensives while working full-time, while being a full-time wife and mother. This was exhausting and required more discipline and commitment than I ever knew I had, but I did it. I graduated in 2015. Anybody can find a place in higher education. There's literally a place for everyone. Just a few things you should know about college that might dispel some of the myths that you may have heard over the years. Often we hear about Ivy League colleges in the news. Those schools get a lot of attention, and admissions into those colleges is very competitive, but most colleges accept 50% or more of those who apply. Many fully online colleges have open enrollment, which means that they accept everyone. Now, that doesn't mean that their programs aren't still rigorous and valuable. It just means that they give everyone an opportunity to be a successful college student, regardless of their background. But if you are concerned about an online school, just check into their accreditation. Now, also, non-traditional college students make up almost 75% of the students enrolled in higher education right now, which means non-traditional technically is students who have jobs, families, don't necessarily live on campus, attend distance programs or online classes, or just go to school part-time. Those are some of the things that make up a non-traditional student. But this is also a large population of adult learners. So non-traditional isn't really non-traditional anymore. And lastly, we hear on the news all the time about the cost of college and how it's increased exponentially over the past decade or two. And that is true, but so has the percentage of students who earn scholarships. So don't be too intimidated by what you hear. So what has changed over the last many years in college? We're going to talk about a few things. First of all, one of the things we're going to talk about is new majors. If it's been a while since you thought about college or looked into college, it's quite different in terms of what you might find as options for majors. Think of all the technological advances and how that could influence careers. Students can study social media and communication strategies when it comes to fields like sales or marketing. New media is a major that explores media consumption on digital devices. Computer science has grown and changed and includes a lot of hot fields like cybersecurity or digital forensics. So there may be something new out there that you haven't even considered. Also, diverse and flexible content delivery. So there are courses in just about every format you can imagine nowadays. Courses that meet online for lectures, but go in person for labs. Some courses that are completely asynchronous online where you just log in at your own time. Some that just have start dates and you complete it at your own pace. There's no deadlines. So there truly is something for every type of learner with every type of schedule. And just about every course that you could sign up for nowadays is going to have some kind of online component. Whether you have digital textbooks, you turn papers and assignments into an online Dropbox, or maybe you're required to participate in online discussion boards. So just come to expect that. Also, competency-based learning is a type of curriculum where students can use their experience to test out of certain modules in courses if they can pass the final course competency-based exam. A lot of words there. So this is a great advantage to learners who have worked in their field for a long period of time without a degree, but have a lot of knowledge. There's some ways that that can work for you. And then lastly is centralized curriculum. Many schools now have courses designed by instructional designers who build the courses based on very specific learning outcomes, and where all instructors teach to the same course outline and utilize the same materials, maybe even the same exams. This creates better consistency in schools where, like, remember the days when you used to hear that Susie got the easy professor and seems to do nothing but still gets an A, and you work your butt off in the same course, but with a different professor or a different teacher, and you barely get a B? That's a little less common these days in schools that have centralized curriculum. They're just a little more consistent, which is good. So now I'm going to pass it over to Henry, who's going to tell you a little bit about where he came from and how he got to where he is today.
Yeah, hi everybody, and then I'll be the third to say welcome and thanks for your attendance today, and that includes those of you who may be listening on the recording. So again, welcome. My name is Henry Price. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I went a pretty traditional route in that in 1993, so you can do the math and figure out my approximate age. I graduated high school and went directly into college and completed it in 4 years. I got my degree in music. Things got a little less traditional at that point because I didn't actually go into music, but music is one of those majors that people understand requires a lot of different kind of brain powers. You have to be pretty good at math. You have to be fairly creative. These are things that employers are interested in. So just kind of putting that out there, if you are concerned about your background not applying to a career you might be interested in now, that is a much less dramatic concern than a lot of people think. I actually ended up going back to work at my alma mater that I graduated from, and within a few years thought, you know, it makes sense to go ahead and get a master's degree while I'm here. I get a tuition discount, and graduated with that in 2002. That was a master's in educational technology. And as you may have guessed, given where I now work, that actually ended up setting the stage for what did become my career, working for the Princeton Review and Tutor.com. So you never know what your pathway is going to be. My job today is to give you some information about the application process, and then a little bit about how to pay for it later on in the presentation. So first things first, you may at the moment be kind of feeling like, I don't even know where to begin. So my goal is to get your ducks in a row a little bit. If you currently feel a bit like these ducks, that is to say, there's a lot to think about, it's just a wall of information, there's a lot going on around you, you're not sure where to begin, I'm going to take my cue from Amy just a couple of minutes ago, and let's take a look at some more things about the application process that are different for you than they were for traditional students back when you were maybe thinking about going to college straight out of high school. First, schools know that you are a non-traditional student. They know that adult learners are not the same as high school students. And that applies across a variety of different ways that they look at you. Rules around admission, rules around being a full-time and part-time student may be different. Adult-friendly programs are built around the assumption that you are working, which means you're going to find a lot of options for evening classes, weekend classes, and more now, online classes that make it possible for you to be a functioning adult in society while also pursuing a degree. Sources of financial aid are also going to be very different for you now, and more on this in a bit, but just to set the stage, a lot of federal and other types of aid are earmarked for kids coming out of high school, but you still are eligible for some of that. And you're eligible for some new things that high school kids aren't. So do your research. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in just a few minutes. It's unlikely that your SAT and ACT scores are still a factor as an adult student thinking about going back into college. This will vary depending on where you're applying, but as a general guideline, if you are over 25, it's unlikely that your SAT and ACT scores are going to be considered as part of your application. If you have completed any prior college coursework, it's very unlikely that your SAT and ACT scores are still a factor. Universities and colleges know that your work experience and your prior collegiate coursework are a much better indicator of your success, especially now, than some tests that you took back when you were in high school. But you do want to check with your schools. You do want to make sure that this is the case for you. And hey, if your scores back in the day were impressive, there is no harm in submitting them as part of your application. So hopefully that helps you think a little bit more about how to make this happen, and you feel a little bit less confused about where to even begin. Hopefully, like this mama duck, you feel a little bit more confident that you have an entry point into this process and have what you need. So let's talk about the application. And again, no matter what your student status is, you have to fill out an application. There's a lot to this. So rather than look at it as an unsolvable puzzle, which it may feel like right now, my advice is get organized. Give yourself a timeline. Let's take a look at how that might work. The most important and most consistent part of anyone's application are their secondary school academics. That's academic terminology for your high school transcripts, okay? You may have a copy of those transcripts. If not, your school or school district should be able to access them and forward them to your university or college that you're applying to, even if it's been several years. If it turns out you do need to submit your SAT and or ACT scores, you still can. There are a couple of websites you can go to. If you took the SAT, the easiest way to go, the easiest URL to remember is just collegeboard.org, and the SAT page is fairly easy to find from there, but that is the actual URL that takes you directly to their SAT suite of assessments. And if you took the ACT, that one actually is really easy to remember. It's just ACT.org. And you can order your scores even if they're from several years back. Please note, your transcripts and your SAT and or ACT scores, should you need to go retrieve them from the district or from College Board or ACT, there may be a fee that applies to doing that. So just be prepared. So beyond your high school academics, you are now gonna, if you have this, also need to show evidence of your post-secondary or college level academic history. If you have taken those kinds of courses, you again may have a copy of your transcripts, but if not, your former school should be able to access and forward them, even if it's been several years. If that sounds familiar, it should. The process for getting your transcripts from a high school and from a college aren't that different. If you do have transfer credits, and Rachel's going to give you some great ideas around how to apply transfer credit in a little bit, talk to your former institution as well as the ones you're applying to get the biggest picture about how that might get you maximum credit. Again, listen to Rachel in a few minutes. She's got some really cool ideas about this. As part of the application, you may also be asked to submit letters of recommendation. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of an application. It feels like one of those boxes you can just check, but they can be used strategically, and they can get you in better position for admission or for scholarships. First of all, you need to find people who have good and unique things to say about you and things that have not been mentioned elsewhere in the application. Your job is to make their job easy. You want to give them a lot of lead time. You want to remind them of great things they already know about you. And you want to give them specific instructions on how to submit this. That means they may need to be on the lookout for direct communication from the schools that you're applying to. You're going to want to sort this out before you make the ask. So in short, letters of recommendation can be really powerful tools. Look to see who they're asking them for, if it needs to be an employer or a former academic contact of yours. Find out who it is, give them lots of time to do it well, and make their jobs easy. Of course, you will have to fill out an actual application. The easiest way to do that is if your college or university that you're applying to uses the Common App. If you're not familiar with that, the Common App is a web resource that a huge percentage of American colleges and universities use across all 50 states to allow you to put all that information in just once. So if you have high school records, college records, SAT, ACT scores, letters of recommendation, they can be housed on the Common App site. And then you can go in and just tell the site which schools you would like those to be sent to. There's often some additional work to be done for each individual one, but the majority of the stuff you need to do, you got to do no matter where you're applying. And so universities subscribe to the Common App so that you can apply multiple places without starting from scratch each time. If you live in Texas, Rachel and I do, by the way, you know that like a lot of things, Texas likes to do it their own way. So we have Apply Texas, which is Texas's own version of the Common App. Yes, it's very similar, but it's only for schools in Texas. That does apply to most schools in Texas. And of course, you can also go to any school's website, and they'll either let you apply directly through their site or direct you to the Common App or Apply Texas. Keep in mind, if you have a choice and you plan to apply more than one place, the Common App is going to make your life a lot easier than going to each individual website and doing it each time. So if you have a choice, go to Common App or Apply Texas, and that should help save you some time. And finally, you may be required to write one or more essays as part of your application. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that that's actually true. See if they're required, especially for you as an adult student. If it is required, give yourself a long runway to write a good one. And again, it needs to provide you with something unique. You're going to want to have this edited and or proofread by somebody who is really good and understands this stuff. This is a good opportunity to tell the story of, for instance, why you're passionate about going back to school at this stage of your life, if that's a big part of your story. Remember, you're also sending everything else you see on the screen right now. So your essay needs to be honest and consistent with your profile. So you want to make sure that if you're mentioning when and where you worked or when and where you went to school, you want that information to be identical in every step and every aspect of your application, not to raise any red flags. But it also has to add unique value. So if you're going to be writing an essay or getting a letter of recommendation, then you want to make sure that that doesn't just say your hire and fire dates from each job and your when you attended school, and you want it to be something more than just I am punctual and I have a positive attitude, things anybody can say about themselves. You want to use those opportunities to say something that I wouldn't know if I were the admissions officer just by looking at your raw application data. So if you keep that in mind and you do all of these things, then hopefully by the end of it, that puzzle will come together for you. All right, so as we move forward, I'm going to take a break here and hand this off to Rachel, who's going to give you some amazing information about transfer credits and electives.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. When I first started my college experience, I was 17 years old, fresh out of high school, going to community college, working full-time hours at a pizza place. And then over the next 20 years, I attended a total of 5 different colleges and universities. I took college classes with varying levels of success during all 3 of my combat tours while I was in the military. I transferred college credits, military transcripts, CLEP courses, and life credits. I have paid cash, taken out student loans, and used the GI Bill. So by the time this 20-year adventure was coming to a close and I was finishing my bachelor's degree, I already had an associate's degree. I was teaching at a local technical college full-time. I was also freelancing as a professional resume writer. I taught Sunday school every weekend, and I was a single foster mom with 2 kids ages 9 and 11. So needless to say, things were a little crazy. But the beauty of being an adult learner and of getting through all of that craziness is that you tend to learn a lot more than just what's in the curriculum. And one of the most valuable things I learned over 20 years in a variety of extremely different and unique educational experiences is that you really can customize your education to meet your needs and get the absolute most out of it as possible. And one of the ways to do that is with your electives. If you ask me, one of the greatest tragedies in higher education is the lackadaisical attitude that we tend to have about elective courses. If I gave you $100 to spend at a store, would you buy $75 worth of things that you really need and then spend the rest on some random stuff that just happened to have been available and easy to reach on the checkout line? No. Would you use 25% of your money on things you don't really care about or want? Absolutely not. But if you take a bunch of random electives without putting serious thought into them, that's kind of what you're doing with a lot more than $25, I might add. So here are some things to consider when choosing your electives. Are you going back to college for a career transition? Career transition resumes are a very unique type of resume, and there are some specific needs that you really want to make sure that you meet. A career transition resume relies on a combination of relevant education, training, and crossover skills that are applicable in any industry. So the electives you choose can become the relevant coursework that boosts your resume, even if you do lack a little bit of industry specific experience. And that concept is not just helpful for a career transition resume. Specialized training is always an asset. If you've gone back to school to be eligible for promotion, for management, for some other type of career advancement, you can customize your electives to meet those needs too. If you plan to do a lot of presentations, consider taking a public speaking class. If you will need to manage people, consider taking a psychology course. If you'll plan on doing a lot of interactions via written or oral communications, take a communications class. You have the opportunity here to take your electives to another level, and they can become a really powerful tool for you to enhance your college experience. But electives aren't the only way to get the most bang for your buck. Pretty much everything about transfer credits is going to depend on the university to which you are transferring them. So you really need to have a conversation with your admissions department. And some of the questions that you want to ask is, will you accept my credits? Are they still valid? How many can I transfer? Is there a cap? Is there a maximum number of transfer credits? How will they be applied, or how can they be applied? And how can this impact my degree track? So ask the admissions department for some analyses based on one or two different possible options. Here's what you'll be looking at without any transfer credits. This is what you're going to need to do to complete this degree program. Here's how it would change if we apply your transfer credits in this way. Here's how it would change if we apply them in a different way. Or maybe consider changing your major to something similar, but with different requirements to get the most out of those transfer credits. Don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions, and don't be afraid to negotiate, because there's often some wiggle room, and transfer credits can make a huge difference, but you won't know until you start asking those questions. Now, transferring previous college credits is great, but that is not your only option. As an adult student, you have in some ways more education than your traditional student peers. Your life experiences, your professional experience, your military service, if you have it, credentials, professional certifications, and licensure, those are all part of an educational experience that takes place over the course of a lifetime. And just because they weren't attained sitting in a classroom doesn't mean they can't count toward your degree. So what are life credits? Well, there are a lot of different ways to earn them. One way to earn life credits is through a prior learning assessment. This can be an exam, or it can be a portfolio of experience, which is basically a course-specific set of documentation of relevant life and work experience that demonstrates that you have the knowledge base to have successfully passed this course, and you can prove it. Colleges and universities evaluate these differently. So make sure you ask them specifically about portfolios of that nature. For example, Penn State will give you up to 3 credits per portfolio, but Thomas Edison State has no cap on the number of credits you can earn for one single portfolio. So make sure you're engaging the admissions department and finding out all the ways that you can achieve additional credits before you even start. College level examination program, which is CLEP courses, can also take the place of an entire course requirement. When I was completing my bachelor's, I was able to take 2 CLEP exams, Microsoft certifications, in order to meet the computer science requirement for my degree, which saved me a lot of time and a lot of money. Professional licenses are also very valuable. Examples of licenses that can transfer into credits are CPA, real estate, aviation, FAA, ASE, project management. There's really no limit. So if you hold any valid current certifications, make sure you're bringing documentation with those with you when you go to meet with your admissions department. Don't forget about them just because they're not from a school. They are still equally valuable. There's also defense activity for non-traditional educational support, which is a mouthful, which is why we call it Dante's. And your military transcripts are going to be very valuable if you've got those. If you have served, make sure you include your joint service transcripts in your application. You can be credited for anything from MOS training to correspondence courses, leadership training, sometimes even rank. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you've done correspondence courses in the past through the military, they may not show up on your JST depending upon where you were certified. So check the JST, your joint service transcript. Look for those correspondence courses. If they're not on there, print off those certifications and bring those separately. The bottom line is, don't leave anything on the table. If you've got it, find a way to use it, because the more credits you start with, the less your degree will cost you. Which brings us back to Henry, who has some fantastic information on how you're going to pay for all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And I know what some of you are probably thinking, like, okay, Henry and Rachel, I believe you, I can do this. but how can I pay for it? Okay, and before we get into it, I do want to make sure it's clear none of us on this panel are financial advisors. We're not here to tell you how to invest your money or whether it's a good investment for your personal situation. Even if I were a financial advisor, I can't possibly do that without knowing anything about you. So we're just giving basic information about what exists. Okay, so with that in mind, maybe you currently feel a little bit like Mario here, expending a lot of energy, taking big risks, and getting nickel and dimes for your efforts. But it doesn't have to be that way. So here's some advice on how to secure the financial help you might need to make sure that college is in fact a good investment. Let's first get into the two major types of aid. There are two basic categories. You've got your grants and loans, and you've got your scholarships. Let's talk about how those things are different. Grants and loans are need-based. And what that means is you don't have to prove you deserve them, you have to prove you need them. And the biggest provider of grants and loans is, of course, the federal government. To apply for it, and this is just to establish eligibility, you don't have to accept anything, and it isn't divulging anything that the government doesn't already know about you, you're going to need these two links. The Fafsa is a long process that's based on your tax returns, and you need a good long time to get it done right. The Fafsa becomes available each October for the school year that starts the following fall. So let's unpack that a little bit. It's 2022. I'm breaking news here. It's 2022. And you would, for instance, be interested in attending school starting in fall of 2023. The Fafsa you need for the school year that begins in the fall of 2023 will become available in a month, okay, in October of 2022. It will be based on your financial information, your tax records from 2021. So all you need to have done is file your 2021 taxes or gotten an exclusion for that or whatever it is you did earlier this year for 2021, and you have the financial information you need to begin your Fafsa. It lives at fafsa.ed.gov. Please don't Google Fafsa. I have seen sites that will ask you to pay to do your Fafsa for you. Well, if you're wondering what Fafsa stands for, it's the free, that first word is free, application for federal student aid. If you find yourself doing it and they want you to pay, you're in the wrong place. Make sure you're at the .gov site. The second site there, which is also a .gov, will give you your FSA ID. That's your Federal Student Aid ID. Those are at different sites because you need to make sure you're the same person, and they're going to make sure that you're above board. So they make you go two different places to confirm that. The short version is start here. Because even if grants and loans are not going to pay for everything, this is where all financial aid begins, including your eligibility for scholarships. Scholarships are merit-based. That means you do have to earn them, or at least qualify for them. The biggest provider of scholarships are the colleges themselves. Take a look at their website, or if you're not sure yet where all you might be applying, make that part of your search criteria. You may also find opportunities that are offered by companies, nonprofits, and other organizations that have a vested interest in getting you the education that you need. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a sec. Remember that financial resources for adult learners are different than they are for traditional students. Find out if the schools that you're looking at offer scholarships for adult learners in particular. And if you're currently employed, see if your company offers tuition reimbursement or scholarships. And as you'll see on this next slide, that is more common than you may think. All of the companies that are popping up on your screen right now offer some form of tuition reimbursement or scholarships to their employees. And this is a very small list of a very small portion of a very large list of companies that do this. The company you're employed with right now may be offering such a thing. These are companies we all recognize though, right? These are companies we all interact with all the time. Some of us might even work for. And hey, if you're currently thinking about getting a job to put yourself through school, one of these or another one that offers a program like this might be a good one to apply to work for while you're working your way through school. Again, this is nowhere near a full list, just some companies that I'm guessing we all recognize on some level, just to give you an idea that this is a common thing. Real quickly, just so you know, while you are most likely to get big financial help from the government or from the university or possibly your employer, there are other places to look, and that's look for special organizations and nonprofits that are actively looking for college students to support. Here are some websites you might go to that provide that kind of support. Scholarships.com, fastweb.com, both of those are pretty good resources. The next two, I've gone ahead and given you the URL that takes you directly to the portion of this that applies to you directly. The Scholarships for Adults page of Scholarships 360, the Adult Learner Scholarships at bestcolleges.com. All of these are resources you could use, but I do want to give you a couple of things to think about. I'm going to give you 3 don'ts and 3 do's about using search engines like this. Don't just rely on the name of the hat scholarships. That's what I like to call the ones where literally all you do is submit your name and email address, and they will put you in some raffle for a scholarship. I mean, do that if it makes sense for you, but don't rely exclusively on those, because everybody who goes to these pages is going to register for those. So your odds of getting it aren't that great, and they're probably not huge dollar values anyway. Second, don't do the opposite. Don't rely on the really high dollar, really difficult to attain ones unless they are absolutely ideally suited to you. I've seen a scholarship that's like, we'll give you $150,000. All you got to do is make a professional quality full-length feature film of your life story. Okay, sure. Let me just knock that out this afternoon, right? Obviously, you can't rely on that to pay for your college education unless you are a really amazing filmmaker, right? And then third, don't look at a handful of results when you use these. You'll get the results that were promoted in many cases, not necessarily the ones that are the best fit for you. So don't just look at the top 4 or 5 things, scroll further and give them better information about yourself. So here are your do's. Do apply for scholarships that you know you'll be eligible for. That is by age, by your current education level, by your academic interests, anything that you are a good fit for. So what you'll do in most of these is you'll give the site information about yourself. And the more you tell the site about yourself, like your education level, what you're interested in getting a degree in, what your long-term goals are, the more likely you're going to find good matches in their search. Second, do put in the work to write an essay or complete other pieces of applications for those mid-range scholarships. So I said, don't rely on the little bitty ones, don't rely on the gigantic ones. There are a ton of these that are in the like 500 to 5,000 to 10,000 range. A lot of people are not going to put in the work to apply for those because it does require that you write an essay or submit a letter to whoever the panel is that makes this decision. And a lot of people just don't bother because, hey, it's only a couple $1,000s. That doesn't really pay for my schooling. But do that for a few, and you've done something a lot of applicants didn't do. And you might be able to pile them on top of each other and suddenly have a lot of money at your disposal. And then the final do, have someone help you with these. If you're going to submit ones that require you to write an essay or similar, get a proofreader, get an editor, somebody who'll keep you honest and hold you to deadlines if that's not something that you are necessarily super strong at. Like a buddy, somebody who's going to help you through the various really complicated sounding stuff that we've gone over for the past half hour or so, just so you can kind of do a check-in every now and then and say, all right, make sure I've got what I need. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Rachel for some final thoughts. And here's Rachel.
Thank you again. So it is never too late to go back to school. Going back to school can be one of the most rewarding, life-changing experiences you'll ever have. History is filled with incredible stories of lives reinvented. But just because you're ready, just because you're excited, doesn't mean that you're not worried. And the truth is, there is only so much you can plan for. Life is going to happen. The most important thing to remember is that you are not alone. The school has resources. All you need to do is ask. There are things available to you like Wi-Fi help, gas cards, financial aid assistance. There's tutoring, library resources, professor help. You can get extended deadlines if you need, or flexible scheduling. There are test out options. There are tons and tons of resources. The colleges are built for your success. There are people and tools and options available to get you through whatever gets thrown at you over the course of your educational experience. So don't be afraid to ask for help. You can't stop life from happening, but if you know what resources are available to you, you can be ready for everything. One of the biggest worries I think people have is how much time will school really take? Well, there are a lot of factors. According to the federal guidelines, 1 college credit hour reasonably approximates 1 hour of classroom learning plus 2 hours of independent work. So that means that for the average 3 credit course, you can expect to spend anywhere around 3 hours in the classroom and 6 hours of studying or homework each week. And that starts to sound really daunting when you start to add all of that up, considering that part-time means taking fewer than 12 credits each semester, and full-time means taking 12 or more credits per semester. So it's starting to get a little intimidating, but the great thing is that you really get to steer. You can adjust your enrollment to your time availability. You're in the driver's seat and you have control. There are some benefits to full-time classes. Sometimes it's less expensive to do full-time just by virtue of finishing faster. So you've got fewer hours away from work, or less commute time and fewer commute costs, less childcare, etc. It depends on your personal situation, but there's definitely something to be said for finishing sooner. And if that's your goal, and if you're able to do that, summer and winter semesters are a great way to expedite graduation. So don't overlook those. But full-time isn't for everybody. So don't be afraid to consider part-time. The a la carte style that you can engage with part-time can be a really great choice for a working adult. You know, is the rest of your life schedule flexible? If it is, then that's a really good option for you. Is your schedule predictable? Can you even commit to full-time classes? What about your family schedule? How is that going to impact your ability to attend class and to complete all your courses? And don't forget, these aren't permanent options, so you can always change your mind. Your schooling is going to affect everyone in your life. Your family, kids, employees, employer, coworkers, colleagues, whoever is in your life, they're all going to be impacted. So involve them in the decision wherever necessary or wherever possible. And if you're not sure, it is okay to start out slow and get your feet wet and get into it, and then increase your pace as you get comfortable. I've once thought that it would be a really great idea to take a college course while I was in Afghanistan, and I missed my final and failed the class because I found myself out of comms, out on mission, and just out of touch for weeks. And by the time I came back, the professors were very sympathetic, but they said, well, that's really like a wonderful story. However, you still started the course and didn't finish the final, so we still had to fail you. So make sure that you are pre-planning as much as is possible. And if you find yourself in a situation where you don't think you're going to be able to complete the course, where you're really, really, really quite positive that you're not going to complete the course, remember the option to withdraw is better than failing. But don't do it unless you absolutely have to. And don't be afraid to lean on your support system, because they benefit from your educational advancement too. As an adult learner, you will also find some very interesting differences between yourself and some of your younger traditional student peers. Things like communication style, the differences in the level of dedication to their schoolwork. Keep in mind, they haven't been anything but students, so patience is going to be an important factor. But on the flip side, they've been students a lot more recently, so you can take advantage of that as well. try to appreciate their perspective and their youth. And I know we talk a lot about the sacrifice of going back to school, but reorient your thinking. If there's one final piece of advice I can leave you with, is don't think of school as a sacrifice. Think of it as a temporary lifestyle change in pursuit of an amazing long-term goal.
Awesome job, Rachel and Henry. This is Amy again. Rachel and Henry are such experts in this topic, and we have some other experts that are going to talk with you if you decide to join our next webinar. So here's just a little plug again, September 28th and October 19th, again at 1 o'clock Eastern. But since we have such amazing experts on the call, I'd like to pass it back over to Maxine to see if anybody has any questions they'd like us to answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, wonderful webinar. We did have a couple of questions come in. And the first one I think is going to be going to Henry, and that was regarding letters of recommendations. And now I'm sure that once you start actually filling out the Common App stuff, or going to specific websites, it'll have some instructions, but generally, how many do you tend to need? And what about submitting more letters of recommendation than are required? Do you find that helpful, or can that actually hurt your application?
I actually don't recommend sending more than they ask for. So if you are, imagine you are a college admissions counselor or reviewer of applications in any capacity, and you got to deal with hundreds of people's applications. If you asked for 2 letters of recommendation, it's because you have time to read 2 letters of recommendation per applicant. If an applicant sends you 9, right, that either means that I'm just going to pick 2 and read them because that's all I wanted, or I'm going to force myself to read all 9 of them, and at that point I'm a little annoyed, right? So I would meet but not exceed the requirement for the number of recommendations that have been requested. Pay close attention to whether there are any guidelines around who should be offering a letter of recommendation. If they want one from a prior work supervisor, make sure that's, or current one, make sure that's who you ask. If they require something more academic, like a former teacher or professor, make sure that's who you ask. And as far as when and how many, that information should always be on the application itself. It's one of the things that will vary school to school. So even if you're using the Common App, go into the section of the Common App that is specifically designated toward each school that you are planning to apply to, and see what their specific requirements are. Do they have a special essay prompt they want everybody to respond to? Do they have any guidelines around letters of recommendation? And again, do they require any of that at all, right? So make sure you're not doing extra work.
Awesome. And then another question that I think would be in your wheelhouse, which was regarding scholarships, grants, loans, and all of that kind of stuff. What are the expectations for paying them back? So, for example, the difference between a loan and a grant, are you paying only just loans back, or do you have to kind of give something in return for grants as well?
A grant is exactly what it sounds like. If you've been issued a grant, that is free money. You do not have to pay it back. A loan is also what it sounds like, right? But as we've all certainly kept up with in the news lately, loans are being forgiven. That doesn't mean you should assume that will happen from now on. It probably will not happen regularly. But a loan does, there are expectations that you pay it back, and you will be paying most of that back with interest. It is the kind of thing that sounds reasonable upfront, like, okay, I'm taking out a $10,000 loan and the interest rate is really low compared to like a credit card or a mortgage, so I can handle that. And then you graduate, and then you're like, well, I want to make sure my payments are as low as possible, so I'm going to finance this loan over like the next 10, 15 years. Now, suddenly, that fairly low interest rate and that fairly low monthly payment has turned your $10,000 loan into a $20,000 loan. It happens a lot quicker than you might realize. So if you are taking out a loan, make sure that you understand the terms. In fact, the government will offer either subsidized or unsubsidized loans, and you can take a look at that. The quick way to understand that is a subsidized loan is one where while you are still in school, there is no interest accruing. So you take out 10,000 and you're in school for 3 years. At the end of that 3 years, you owe 10,000. An unsubsidized loan is one where they actually are starting to accrue interest the moment you take it out. So that $10,000 loan over those first 3 years has already become like a $13,000 loan. I'm making up numbers, but you see my point. So if you can get subsidized versus unsubsidized, if the offer and we didn't get into a lot of detail around financial aid and exactly what the process is and how colleges do it, but ultimately the offer of aid, even though the money comes from the government, comes from the school. So they're going to offer you a package that includes some combination of grants and loans and scholarships. So if school A that costs $20,000 a year offered you $15,000 in free money and $5,000 in loans, that's way better than school B that cost $20,000 and offered you $20,000 in financial aid, but only 5 of that was free and the other 15 were loans, right? So you do want to look closely at the offer sheet that you get and make good decisions about your financial, about what this is going to mean for you financially. And again, this is a really big topic that probably is deserving of its own session, but hopefully that gives you some more to go on.
Yeah, I do think that does help clear the air a little bit and provide more information specifically on the loan part. So thank you very much. And then the last question that we have here that I can see, I think might fall under you, Amy, which is the recording for this webinar. Someone was asking if you think it would be helpful to share out to students or to people who are specifically working with adult learners, or do you think like everybody can pretty much benefit from this webinar?
I think there are pieces of this webinar that can apply to anyone, especially some of the things that Henry was just talking about with financial aid. They can apply to everyone, but we definitely aimed and focused on the adult learner for this. I just think, though, that if you know anyone considering college and you think there's some questions that they have about any of the topics we had, I think that there's certainly some value in it for anyone.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, it looks like that those are all the questions that have come in. But as Amy mentioned, feel free to follow us on our social media pages so that you can keep up to date with all the other webinars that we have going on, including the 2 other C.R.A.M webinars coming up in the next month. But Amy, do you have anything else that you want to say before we end today?
No, this was great. Thank you so much for your questions, and we hope you come back and see us in a couple weeks.
All right. Thanks so much. And everybody have a wonderful rest of the day.